We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, as a surprise to everyone, I'm going to be talking about the Last Contract of Isako. In addition, if for whatever reason you haven't read this yet, understand we're just taking a little week break basically from what we had planned. Next week, come back for Queen Amid Ashes, and then we'll be starting Demon in White. Just needed a little bit of space given some schedule fluctuations, moving and travel and everything else that kind of got in the way over the weekend. I hope you enjoyed this episode chatting a little bit about the new Fonda Lee release. If for whatever reason you haven't read it, there's a little bit of an intro to kind of give you a pitch. Beyond that, if you're looking for something else and a little bit more substantial, I highly recommend you go check out our episode with the Sons of Ares. We had this wonderful long conversation, I think their longest episode ever, talking about Chapter 42, Death of a Gold by Pierce Brown in Golden Sun. So both are lovely. Enjoy this if you've read the book. If not, give Hey there, this is Kross, and I am Words and Whiskey for this week. We're a podcast, of course, for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club. This week, a little bit less intoxicating and a little bit more quick, considering that it's just me that you're chatting with today or hearing in this circumstance. But I'm really excited today to talk about The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda Lee. I've got a lot of thoughts. I finished this book earlier this morning, and I'm very excited to chat about it. So you're getting this really fresh off of a really quick read, and there are a ton of different reasons for that. One, I've been reading a wide variety of things, including Musashi, which I'm so excited to talk about in the near future, about the first third of, because there's a lot of book there. And then some, obviously, returning to the Sun Eater and other series in that realm. But that said, if you don't want any spoilers, I just want to say I loved this book start to finish. Spoiler alert for my own review and my own thoughts, but I really, really enjoyed this novel in its entirety. So I hope that you do as well. To give everyone a summary who might not be aware, of course, Fonda Lee being the author of the Greenbone Saga, which we covered extensively on this channel and on this podcast. If you want, you can go find all of those episodes, which were co-hosted by the lovely Heller Pod, as well as Thomas from High Key Obsessed. Highly recommend it. But if you want a summary of this book before I hop into my spoiler kind of conversation about it, here we go. In a world where layoffs are death sentences, we find ourselves greeted by an aging contractor, Isako, who is forced into one last job after the unexpected death of her previous company sponsor. As a corporate samurai, Isako finds herself at the heart of a conspiracy and delves deeper to find out the truth at the heart of this corporation that could shake Akilo's foundation. In addition, there are a ton of lovely turns of phrase and twists. This is a post-Earth sort of story. I highly recommend you give it a try. It's so much fun, and it does such a good job with so many things that I personally love and have found endearing over the years, especially from Fonda Lee's writing, but also from the kind of things that we like to tackle on this channel. There are a ton of really interesting call-outs and callbacks, especially to some intermixing both this corporate samurai angle with some Greco-Roman, the corporate espionage ideal. I would definitely say that this is for fans. If you've enjoyed the previous books by Rob Hart, this fits in really nicely in between Assassins Anonymous and The Paradox Hotel from a science fiction perspective, kind of giving it a little bit of that extra oomph. It's a lovely book. 500 pages long, has a lot of those critical tells of the Greenbone Saga too that you can really kind of point to and be like, I see what you're doing there. But now with that out of the way, I'm going to hop into spoilers. So go if you don't want spoilers. Okay. First off, I said this at the top and I will say it again. I loved this book. From the very beginning, there is a lovely sort of sense of pace. We open with this wonderful scene where we're tackling the first sort of death sentences and executions that Isako has to deliver to her initial contracts, and we get a sense of the sort of violence of this world. And I almost wish that there's a deep part of me that wishes that this was a larger part of the story than just sort of initially, but we get an idea of what happened before, right? And that's sort of the point of this. We get a sense of the world building. We see this larger corporation that is effectively this country for what it is. We get this idea of wars between the different branches as well. I mean, there's just this wonderful scope that also encompasses this idea of like foundational moral, like religion and ethics and other things like that are just so fantastically interesting. That I really find appealing, and I really believe it to be an incredibly attractive story from that angle. In addition, it is bleak as all get out. I mean, this is an inspiring story in a lot of ways just from its compositional elements, but it's also very clear that a lot of this is clearly inspired by Fonda Lee's previous life as someone within the corporate world. It is very brutally clear that this is meant to be a commentary almost immediately on the sort of corporate structures that have begun to take over and override a lot of life and could very easily, if allowed to go further. I point you no further than the recent judge ruling in Delaware about allowing corporations to have votes in towns because they're impacted by decisions, which is a whole separate thing that we don't need to get into on this podcast. But I mean, corporate ownership over ideas, laws, as opposed to people is a very fascinating one. But there's so many different things that are interesting about this world and the world building on Aquila. We find ourselves in this foreign world that needs gas production in order to terraform it. So it's a big deal to terraform this planet. This leads to sort of our two primary factions, not that we interact with, but we see in the background. We've got the sort of terraformists and the people that are instead looking to contact Earth and come back into contact with them, and it's so excellent. We have this initial idea that we're presented with the air shield as we see Isako's contract and everyone else that she's sort of served these death sentences to walk out for their sort of permanent retirement, as they aren't actually retired to continue breathing. They haven't earned those extra years of life. They're just given a little bit of extra time, basically, serve their dues. There's also this wonderful concept and division of the family unit and sort of like the work training family unit and the actual family unit that I think is just so excellent. The idea of kith mother and these sort of kiths being like the actual mom as opposed to your biological parents is one, you know, as like disappointing as it is to like say some of these things out loud, I understand the like intentional division there, right? Because that emotional attachment is still very human. It just gets attached to someone that isn't your own mother or your father, but at the same time, you still maybe have those relationships. It's really fascinating from that perspective, but also from the other side of it, from the corporation side, it's like, obviously, this is an efficiency play. This is an efficiency grab. This is intended to divide up these groups so that they wouldn't advocate for each other in such a way. And it allows for a quicker indoctrination into the system. And efficiency is the name of the game when you're brought into a situation like this. Okay, so excellent work there. Tons of story. The story lends itself almost immediately when it was described or when I was thinking about the story, I thought of it was going to be a little bit more of an exploration of what a corporate samurai was, and what that turned out to be was very different than what my expectation was. So, and in a good way, it was not one I expected. Maybe more like sword fights or action, but again, from the Greenbone saga, I should have anticipated Fonda Lee's clever hand working in the background. That said, there are a lot of excellent characters in this book. Again, spoilers abound here, but Isako, Cobb, Martine, Uchi, Thea, and kind of everyone else in the circle of the characters. You also have the ladies from the contract house, the original mentor of Isako, as well as the entire idea of the Sweet Sea. It's just so well done, and each of these characters gives such depth in the 512 pages, or roughly 16 hours, that this read encompasses, that I was left kind of gobsmacked with the level of involvement. About halfway through the story, we make a big flip from Isako's perspective, of which you're really loving and enjoying the momentum of, that takes this like dramatic turn into violence in kind of the final two chapters of her POV before the switch into Dragonfly Martine. I gotta say, I know that some people in the Discord had said that our Discord, the Patreon Discord, had said that they had saw the twist coming. But I was completely blindsided. Close friend of the channel as well, Overly Average Ben, I watched his review before doing this, and he said that he saw it coming, and I was like, man, I just truly don't know if it was because I was just so engrossed in it that I couldn't like see between the lines, but I was truly surprised by A, the flip into Dragonfly Martine's perspective, but then B, this time sort of end-all be-all, where he was ultimately the replacement for Uchi. I found that a very compelling switch, although I do want to say Dragonfly Martine's story was excellent, but I found Isako's POV, even though it wasn't a first-person delivery or anything like that, a little bit more linearly compelling. I think that has something to do just with how abrupt those time skips really are and kind of filling in the space there. It felt like Isako I was more living in the skin of versus Martine I was like reflecting on a little bit more from like a databank perspective. So that was really interesting to me, and I was very curious about that. That said, this actually brings up a question, and I'm curious if there is a solid answer, because I don't remember one. It's described that Dragonfly Martine buys a ton of text storage before he, that's like one of the big tells that they're the cracker that they have, the other contractor that does mostly hacking. Man, his name starts with C. It's not coming to me. He finds this massive storage database, and my only thought is that maybe that's holding all the records for the stuff that he could hold over Uchi himself, but I don't know that that's ever fully explored or explained as to why. We can see where Isako draws the line, seeing the Great Waste Drug and some other things like that, understanding that that Martine was definitely alive, but hadn't fully put together sort of the problem with Uchi or what was going on there, assumed that he was just hiding it. So there's some interesting pieces there. I want to mention Cobb entering the story is just such an excellent breath of fresh air. It felt, though, very clear to me, and I'm glad that the story didn't go this way, and then instead we get our sex scene from Martine, but it felt very clear to me that Cobb and Isako were going to end up together in some capacity, and I kind of wanted that. I don't know if I wanted more or less from that relationship, but I love this idea of them kind of like living together and walking off into the sunset, protecting each other. It is more than what's presented, more than the sum of its parts in a lot of ways, because you really get to see the characters and the dialogue a little bit more. It really built that out for me. I really appreciated that. Martine, back to Martine again for a second. I love this idea that I think Isako comments on when she says, young people like Martine are motivated by fear of failure. Old hands like her and Cobb are just trying to redeem themselves for failures already made. And there's just this wonderful reflection of this idea of aging within this story. The bones, the aches, the pains, that I really love. I mean, I'm almost immediately reminded in a lot of the depictions and like my mental image of thinking about Glocta and the click-tap pain of it all. Every time she mentions needing to bend over, flex, do something to get her knees into shape. It gave me that same sort of energy, and I really appreciated it. Uchi himself, man, one of the biggest tells for me that something was up with Uchi at the very least was when we did switch into Martine's perspective. While there was a layer of cruelty to him, he wasn't as cruel as he was in that meeting with Isako. And so that did lend itself to me poking at that artifice mentally, being like, okay, something is up with him. And I had assumed that instead it was something that had actually gone wrong with his transfer into the artificial Second Life body, as opposed to it actually being Martine. So that was sort of I was like on the trail, but not quite there all the way. But really appreciated that nonetheless. Thea, as an idea, is such a good character too, being chronically in debt and sort of permanently indebted to Uchi and staying by the side, and sort of this sort of revenge view as well, that just kind of is painful to witness on her behalf and on the wife's behalf. We kind of get some closure on that in the penultimate chapter, or maybe it's the final chapter at the beginning. Either way, there is just some excellent wrap-up of her finally getting to go see her mountain and the dreams that she held as a part of this like long life that she was going to be able to live. I really just genuinely love this book. It's worth noting, too, that as I had mentioned, there are a number of things where if this was a book that we were to cover on the podcast, I would love to talk about more. Obviously, the references to Epictetus, Memento Mori, things like that. It's really great. I'm a big fan of Epictetus, and frankly, I don't think enough people cite him in the canon of Stoics. Even Pierce Brown and the like. I actually have on my wall a little piece of art, generally from the Daily Stoic a while ago, a long time ago. How long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself? It's such a good quote and reminder, and there are a couple of those throughout. One that, of course, is excellent is you become what you give your attention to, which is another sort of Stoic aphorism, again, from Epictetus. But I think that specifically is likely boiled down more to The Art of Living, I believe, is what that's from originally. But yeah, just excellent. Just a great story to break down. I will say the only problem that I really had with this story, I think, was, as I had kind of mentioned, but maybe not finished the thought on earlier, the sort of break in pace, right? I was loving Isako's perspective and sort of the grounded nature. And then heading into Dragonfly Martine almost felt like I was entering a second different novel. And that's okay. Often POV switches like that I'm generally a big fan of. And I love that idea at large. But I do feel like the story lost a little bit of its intimacy to give me plot in the form of Martine. But I think that plot was compelling, and I think that Martine was an interesting character, including like that date that he intentionally went on and then got killed as a part of that sort of relationship blocked and everything else. While I'm talking about that real quickly, the only negative comment that I have about any of the prose in the book is that while I understand at large, and I was chatting with a friend about this, I love that this book also, obviously, it's post-Earth. And so there are a lot of things that survived Earth into this story naturally, Epictetus, things like that. I don't know if I love the word ghosted being in here, because I don't think that term will survive a generation or two in the long run. You know what I mean? And this is several hundred years later. So it just doesn't feel right to me. There are some other terms that I'm totally down with and that I definitely think, but that was the one, for whatever reason, very late in Martine's story, grated on me a little bit. Not much, not significantly. This is not a significant complaint. I'm looking for a small thing to complain about in a book that I otherwise love. Returning then to Isako's perspective in the moment in which she shoots the body of Uchi, the cryogenically frozen body of Uchi in the head, we then get this sort of very dramatic moment as we reveal in return. And from there, the pace is still notched up in such a way that I don't feel like we ever return to the intimate noir kind of moment that I wanted, that I was really enjoying the pace of. And instead, we're resolving things in the final 8 chapters or so of the book. And that's super reasonable and very necessary in a story. I super get it. I just also can't help but feel like I was a little bit more lost as a part of that time. You know what I mean? I wanted a little bit more of a tangible something to grab onto and hold on to a little bit more clearly. That said, we get our final objective in our path. We're going to go through with sort of some like reverse blackmail and give in, so that the final contract is the Last Contract of Isako is literally fulfilled in such a way that her contract holder will be satisfied. And I love that we head into that, and then we see this assassination happen that like blows up our plans in so many different ways. We then get this sort of grimmer reveal of the impossibility of these things working, as it would have unwound society to such a large degree that of course it wasn't going to happen. Of course the contract holding house was not going to let any of this happen. I mean, it just feels like such a natural and grim, dystopic, demure, dark, painful ending in so many different ways, especially for Isako, of whom has gone through this whole thing and is now experiencing a second phase of mourning of her apprentice and his sacrifice that was made for the company. I mean, both of them just showing that, like, in the end, we are all cogs in the machine of of this world. And there's a deep tragedy at the heart of that portion of the story. So I absolutely loved this book. I really think, on the whole, that if you did, please leave all your comments or things that you'd like to comment back within our comments, either on Spotify or on YouTube, of course. And we'll get back to you. I'll get back to you with my thoughts at the very least, or join our Patreon, patreon.com/words and whiskey. We can chat about it more in the Discord, but I really think that I wish for more for this, from this world, from this story, not Isako necessarily, but to see Akilo in some other form, perhaps, but also simultaneously leaving it there on this grim, dire note of corporations and war and sort of what was it that Uchi suggested? He was like, in receding and not giving Earth back the messages that we discover they've been getting for 200 years. He says something to the effect of, there is always an oppressor, right? There is always an oppressor in the system. There's always a lesser to be taken advantage of, and that he believes that they would have become that if they begin to communicate back. And, there's a big part of me that thinks that he's right. There's a big part of me that understands exactly where he's coming from. I make these recommendations. Okay, I'll end this on a couple of different recommendations. I've seen a lot of people say that this is the best standalone science fiction book that they've read. And I gotta say, you gotta read a little bit more science fiction, a little bit more widely, because Neil Stephenson exists, generally speaking. But I do want to recommend a couple of different things. One, if you love Akilo and sort of the world building here, I'm always going to go back to my recommendation of Stephen Baxter. I don't think enough people read Stephen Baxter. The standalone that I generally recommend for a lot of people to start on is Evolution. It's a great story. You also, after reading that, should read Destiny's Children. No, it has nothing to do with Destiny's Child, but it does have a lot to do with Roman history leading into ancient future, into very disparate human factions that exist in the future, including some like clone colonies that are out there, and then kind of like a post-human, post-modernist view on what that all could mean nearer to the end of time. And it's such a good read if you enjoy things like Three Body Problem. But Evolution is the one to go for there. And friend of the channel, one of the closest comparisons that I found to this, reading this, is it reminded me of an Assassin's Anonymous novel. It reminded me of Medusa Protocol, Three Hitmen and a Baby, and Assassin's Anonymous itself, as well as Paradox Hotel or Warehouse. So I gotta say, if you're enjoying this, I would recommend either picking up one of the Assassin's books, The Warehouse, or Paradox Hotel, depending on your flavor of standalone. What's nice about the Assassin series is that while it's more of a serial than it is an outright series, you can pick up anywhere in it and you'll enjoy the episode of the week that is without needing too much past context. So really, really highly recommend those. And then, I mean, Neil Stephenson, what needs to be said? A lot of people love Anathema. Snow Crash is obviously the closest one. Seven Eves is newer. I haven't personally read it, but I've had it highly recommended to me on that side of things. So yeah, I mean, just go pick up a couple. He's a great author. He kind of, well, he didn't define the same sort of space. He's occupied it. I mean, Snow Crash is such an interesting novel that kind of hits on a lot of these different ideas. Anathem, not Anathema. Anathem, Rise and Fall of the Dodo, Termination Shock, more recently. So I highly recommend you go check out those books if you're curious on things that are more within the realm. That said, kind of a final note from me on this book. I'll give it a rating. I'm going to say this is a 9 out of 10. I think that there are a number of different twists that work really well here. I think that it's all really well executed. The character and the world building are excellent, bar none. I would recommend this to a lot of people. Matter of fact, this is probably the book that I'm going to give a lot of people before giving them the Greenbone Saga. I think there's a lot of trepidation sometimes with introducing people to even a trilogy of books in a series with people who are non-readers. And so I think that both like The Devils and this are great recommendations for me to give of like, okay, let's add Fonda Lee to your all-time favorite writers list. And then you're going to go read everything else and you're going to love her. So this has entered that canon for me, and I'm very excited to begin recommending it to friends and family more widely. Oh, that said, thank you so much for listening to the podcast or watching this on YouTube, wherever you're doing it. I do think that we're definitely going to be back. I've already written the notes for a Demon in White episode that we're recording tomorrow. So I am very excited to get back into the world of Sun Eater, especially with this next big jump. Following that, in release order, you're going to see Queen Amid Ashes next, and then you're going to see the Demon in White episode, of course. But recording with Aaron on Monday of next week. So very, very, very excited to kind of get back into the swing of things, all told. So, you know where to find us, Instagram, etc. You can find all the links everywhere. Please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd like me to talk more about in a specific book review if we do something like this in the future, or less. Who knows? Anyway, cool. See you next time.